Battle of Badr by Muhammad Al-Amrani. In the second year after the Prophet's migration to Medina, a small, persecuted community walked out into the desert. They did not march under banners of empire. They had no armor worthy of an army, no abundance of horses or weapons, no promise of worldly glory. What they carried instead was something the world around them had forgotten. A certainty that there is a Lord above power, a judge above fear, a truth greater than numbers. That day history would remember as Badr, and the Qur'an would name it the day of criterion, the day the two forces met. It was the day the desert itself seemed to bear witness to the difference between illusion and reality. 2 years earlier, these same believers had fled their homes in Makkah with nothing but faith in their hearts and the dust of exile on their clothes. Their properties had been seized, their families torn apart, their faith mocked and tortured. In Medina, they were still struggling to survive. Caravans of Quraysh passed nearby, filled with the wealth taken from those very believers who had been driven out. When word came that a rich Meccan caravan was passing by, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did not command a full military campaign against a great army. He called his companions to intercept a single caravan, a just attempt to reclaim what had been stolen. They set out with no certainty of confrontation, with no intention of grand battle. But in Makkah, the leaders of Quraysh heard of this move and saw something more, a chance to crush the new Muslim community once and for all. They mobilized their pride, their fear, their wealth, and an army of around 1,000 men marched toward a small town called Badr. From Medina came around 300 and a little more. From Makkah came about 1,000. From Medina there were barely 70 camels and only 2 horses. From Makkah there was cavalry, armor, and the arrogance of those who believe that sheer force writes history. Even among some Muslims there was fear. This was not what they had prepared for. The Qur'an would later describe them as being on the nearer bank of the valley, while the enemy approached from the far side, and the caravan slipped away along the coast. Events arranged by a wisdom no human eye could fully see. At Badr, the believers stood between a vast army on one side and their own human frailty on the other, and in that space between fear and trust, faith reveals its true nature. The night before the battle, the believers rested by a small spring at Badr. Rain fell, a mercy that gave them water and firmed the sand beneath their feet, while the enemy on the other side found the ground difficult and their spirits unsettled. In the stillness of that night, they were not discussing strategies of conquest. They were turning to the one in whose hand is every outcome. The Prophet, peace be upon him, stood in supplication until his cloak slipped from his shoulders. He raised his hands to the sky and cried, "O Allah, fulfill for me what you promised me. If this small band is destroyed today, you will not be worshipped on this earth." He wept and pleaded, not for his name to be remembered, but for the message to remain. A companion would later say that he saw the Prophet stretching his arms toward the heavens so intensely that he feared for him, until God reassured him with revelation. Remember when you called upon your Lord for help, and he answered you. I am sending you reinforcement with angels, one after another. 8:9. Help was not being measured in swords and armor. It was descending in ways only hearts can truly recognize. And then dawn broke. The Prophet, peace be upon him, arranged the ranks with calm precision. He drew a line in the sand with an arrow, positioning each man, reminding them that discipline, patience and obedience to God are themselves acts of worship. The first encounter was not a clash of armies, but a meeting between champions. From Quraysh came 3 warriors, Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, his brother Shayba, and his son Al-Walid, veterans of war, symbols of Makkan pride. From the Muslims stepped forward 3 men whose names would live in the memory of this ummah. Hamza ibn Abd al-Muttalib, Ali ibn Abi Talib, and Ubaidah ibn al-Harith. May God be pleased with them all. Steel met steel, dust rose, and in a few intense moments the pride of Quraysh fell to the ground. The sight of their champions slain shook the Meccan ranks, for the illusion of invincibility is fragile when it meets hearts attached to something beyond this world. Then the lines advanced. To human eyes it was chaos, swords clashing, shouts, the thundering of feet. But the Qur'an pulls back the veil on what truly unfolds when hearts stand firm for God. Your Lord revealed to the angels, "I am with you, so keep firm those who believe. You did not kill them, but it was God who killed them. You did not throw when you threw, but God threw." 8:12-17. Some companions would later say that they saw warriors in white garments between the ranks, striking down the enemy with a force they could not explain. Whether their eyes perceived it or not, the Qur'an confirms aid came from beyond the visible. Numbers lost their meaning. On that field, 300 and odd believers faced nearly 3 times their number, and returned having shaken the very foundations of the power that had once tortured them. When the dust settled over Badr, around 70 of the enemy lay dead, and 70 were taken captive. These had been the persecutors, the mockers, the plotters of assassination. Yet in that moment of victory, the Prophet, peace be upon him, did not allow vengeance to rule. Many prisoners were ransomed, but for some the ransom was not gold, it was knowledge. Those who could read and write were asked to teach 10 children of Medina as their payment for freedom. Men who had tried to extinguish the light of Islam were now, by God's decree, literally helping to educate the next generation of believers. This was not a victory of sword over sword, but of principle over impulse, of mercy over blind fury. The Qur'an reminds the believers, God has already given you victory at Badr when you were few in number, so be mindful of God that you may be grateful. 3:123. Badr was not just a military event, it was a turning point in moral history. It shattered the idea that truth must wait until it has the numbers, the wealth, the instruments of force. It declared to all ages that a small community, if sincere, disciplined and rooted in God, can reshape the course of civilizations. Badr drew a clear line, a furqan, a criterion, between a world built on arrogance and tribal pride, and a world striving to stand upon justice, surrender and faith. It taught that victory is not measured only by territory gained or enemies defeated, but by the extent to which hearts are purified of fear of anything besides their Lord. The desert of Badr is silent today, but the questions it raises are alive in every age. Not all our Badr moments involve swords or battlefields. They come when we must speak the truth while surrounded by mockery, hold on to prayer when the world calls us to neglect, refuse injustice even when it costs us comfort. Our numbers may be small, our resources may be limited, but the lesson of Badr is that what matters most is not what is in our hands, it is what is in our hearts. Do we believe that the same Lord who answered the plea of a small band in the desert still hears the whispers of those who stand alone for his sake today? The Qur'an consoles the believers. How many a small group has overcome a larger group by God's permission, and God is with those who are patient. 2:49. Badr is not a story locked in the pages of the past. It is a mirror held up to our own lives. Every time you choose truth over comfort, faith over fear, principle over pressure, you are walking in your own measure the path that 300 believers walked beneath the desert sky. They had little in their hands, but they carried in their hearts a certainty that the world could not defeat. And so the desert recorded a testimony for all who would come after. Power is not where the world imagines it to be. Victory is not always where human eyes expect to find it. On that day, at Badr, a small community stood before a mighty army, and the Lord of the worlds revealed how small an army truly is when it stands against those who place their trust in him.